Over the past few weeks, Enhanced have noticed an increased number of attacks on Office 365 accounts that only use a single form of authentication, a password. So, what are the current risks to cloud applications such as Office 365? So, Office 365 is a highly secure service, but for those that only use single passwords, we're finding that cybercriminals are using two typical methods of attack to these accounts. The first being brute force attacks. So this method is utilizing typically a set of passwords on a list to access those accounts. So typically used passwords, or also passwords that your users have been using for their personal accounts with their data leaked out onto the dark web. The second form being through phishing attacks. This is where we are finding that emails are being sent out to a user set, typically branded as Microsoft emails, basically asking those users to follow a link to a reset password account for Office 365, which looks entirely genuine to the user. If they don't know what they're looking for, they enter their credentials, and then the cybercriminal has their passwords to access the account. So what's the business impact for those that have been attacked in this way? The first is the loss of data. So with access to your accounts, they have access to both your email data and any data that you've got within SharePoint and OneDrive as well. So loss of data or data leakage could end up in legal proceedings, damage your reputation, and most importantly, a loss of revenue. The second is through impersonation and defrauding. So this is where they have access to your email account as well as your contact list. So we're finding cyber criminals sending emails either internally raising fake POs or emails to your customers as well, raising invoices against them to a separate bank account from your own.
The most common way to secure data is by implementing multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is a process where a user is prompted during the sign-in process for an additional form of identification, such as to enter a code on their mobile or to provide a fingerprint scan. If you only use a password to authenticate a user, it leaves it as an insecure vector for attack. If the password is weak or has been exposed elsewhere, is it really the user signing in with their username and password, or is it a potential attacker? When you require a second form of authentication, security is increased, as the additional factor isn't something that's easy for an attacker to obtain or duplicate. Azure multi-factor authentication works by requiring two or more of the following authentication methods. Something you know, typically a password, something you have, such as a trusted device that is not easily duplicated, like a phone or a hardware key, something you are, biometrics, like a fingerprint or face scan. Users can register themselves for both self-service password reset and Azure multi-factor authentication in one simple step. This is to simplify the onboarding process. Administrators can therefore define what forms of secondary authentication can be used, therefore being able to utilize this across the business. Azure multi-factor authentication can also be required when a user wants to perform a self-service password reset, therefore securing that process further.